The rope burns into her wrists as the Montana sun beats down mercilessly. Sara Wind Runner counts her breaths, slow, measured, fighting the panic that threatens to steal what little strength remains. 2 days tied to the railroad tracks, her parched lips cracking, her torn dress offering no protection against the elements, all for refusing a white man's advances and being accused of a theft she never committed. The distant whistle grows louder, iron vibrating beneath her back. She doesn't close her eyes. If death comes, she'll face it with the same dignity they tried to strip from her. The ground trembles. The shadow of a man appears, knife glinting in the sun. Hope Blackwood drops to his knees beside her, blade slicing through hemp as the locomotive bears down. Their eyes lock for one eternal moment, hers steady despite certain death, his determined despite impossible odds. This is how salvation arrives, unexpected, at the last possible moment, from the hands of a stranger who chooses to see her humanity when others saw only her skin. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. The Montana Territory stretched endless under the punishing summer sun of 1879. Iron rails shimmered like mercury threads across the dusty plains, their heat rising in visible waves. Hope Blackwood guided his wagon along the western edge of his property where it met the railroad, his tall frame swaying slightly with each rut in the dirt track. Sweat darkened his shirt between his shoulder blades as he surveyed the fence line he'd need to repair before winter. 3 years had passed since smallpox had taken his wife Elizabeth and daughter Hannah. 3 years since the fire that nearly claimed his cabin, too. The world had narrowed to the rhythms of his small cattle ranch, mending fences, tending livestock, monthly supply runs to Silver Creek Settlement, where he exchanged as few words as possible. Some folks called him standoffish. Others, understanding the weight he carried, simply left him to his solitude. Hope was halfway across the shallow ford when something caught his eye, a splash of color against the weathered railroad ties. At first, he thought it might be abandoned cargo. Then he saw movement. His heart quickened as the distant whistle of the eastbound train reached his ears. Hope snapped the reins, urging his team toward the rails. As he drew closer, his breath caught in his throat. A young Native American woman lay bound hand and foot with coarse rope that had already cut deep into her skin. Her black hair hung in tangled waves around a face streaked with dust and blood. Despite her torn dress and obvious distress, her eyes remained steady, defiant. The train was rounding the bend when Hope reached her, the ground already vibrating beneath his boots. He dropped to his knees beside her, drawing his knife from its worn leather sheath. "Hold still," he muttered, though she hadn't moved a muscle since he arrived. The blade slipped beneath the first rope, binding her wrists, sawing through fibers stiff with dirt and sweat. The train whistle screamed closer as he freed her hands and moved to her ankles. Hope worked the knife against the hemp, feeling each strand give way. The locomotive thundered into view as he pulled her from the tracks, lifting her clear just as the engine roared past. So close, the heat from its boiler scorched his shirt. He carried her to the wagon and laid her carefully on the bed, noticing how her eyes never left his face. She was studying him, weighing whether he represented salvation or just another danger. "My name's Hope," he said simply, offering the only currency he had, honesty. She didn't respond, just closed her eyes briefly in what might have been relief. Hope noticed a silver and turquoise pendant around her neck. something she instinctively protected when she caught his gaze lingering there. As he turned the wagon toward home, Hope couldn't help glancing back at the vanishing train. Whoever had left this woman to die would likely be displeased she had survived. That thought settled between his shoulder blades like the weight of his Winchester rifle. A familiar pressure he hadn't realized he'd missed. By nightfall, he had her situated in his small bedroom while he took the floor near the stove. After drinking 3 cups of water and eating a small meal, she finally spoke. "Sara," she said, her voice raspy from thirst and exposure. "My name is Sara Wind Runner." When Hope asked how she'd ended up on the tracks, her answer chilled him despite the summer heat. They said no one would miss one Comanche girl. Dawn broke with Hope already making his perimeter check, a habit from years of solitary vigilance. When he returned, Sara stood by the mantel, studying the photographs arranged there, Elizabeth with her gentle smile, Hannah with her hair in neat braids. "Your family?" she asked, her voice stronger after a night's rest. Hope nodded, the familiar ache rising in his chest. "Fever, 3 winters ago." Over breakfast, Sara revealed more of herself. She'd been educated at a mission school, spoke fluent English, and could read and write in multiple languages. Her father had been a respected Comanche leader who advocated cooperation with settlers until his death the previous winter. She was traveling to find translation work when railroad workers accused her of theft. "I did not steal," she said, eyes flashing. But they did not care for truth. Hope noticed how she assessed the cabin, noting exits, tools, items that could serve as weapons. When one of his horses startled at a falling branch, Sara approached the frightened animal with natural confidence, speaking softly in Comanche while steadying it. Her competence stood in stark contrast to the helpless savage narrative that had justified her attacker's actions. Later, when Hope inquired about her pendant, Sara's hand closed protectively around it. "It was my mother's," she eventually explained. "Some things they cannot take from us." While checking fence lines that afternoon, Hope discovered fresh hoofprints near his property boundary, multiple riders who had approached, circled, then departed. He kept this information to himself, not wanting to alarm Sara, but began mentally cataloging defensive positions around the homestead. That night, Sara's scream tore through the darkness. Hope rushed to find her trapped in nightmare, her hands clawing at invisible ropes. "Every time I sleep, I feel them," she confessed. Her composure momentarily fractured. "The ropes, the tracks against my back. The nightmares don't go away," Hope admitted, thinking of his own restless nights. "But they get quieter with time." The following morning, Hope brought out his old Navy Colt. "If trouble comes, you should know how to use this," he said. Sara's hands were steady as she took the revolver, suggesting some familiarity with firearms. By afternoon, she was hitting the tin cans Hope had set up along the fence line. When Hope suggested they ride to the trading post to inquire about Sara's missing cousin, Skydancer, she hesitated visibly. "The last time I went there." "No one will hurt you again," Hope said, his hand resting briefly on his holstered revolver. As they prepared for the journey, Sara altered one of Hope's old shirts to fit her, her fingers quick and sure with needle and thread. Hope watched her efficient movements, recognizing the same resourcefulness that had kept him alive after losing everything, unknown to them, in Silver Creek. The red-bearded foreman, named McCready, was already gathering information. "That Indian woman," he asked the storekeeper, his tone deceptively casual. "Heard some fool rancher took her in. That true?" Meanwhile, Hope and Sara worked side by side, repairing a section of fence damaged in a recent storm. Their hands fell into natural rhythm, passing tools and supporting posts without need for instruction. "My father would have said you have a good heart," Sara told him as they finished the task. "This is the highest praise among my people." That evening, as they cleaned their respective weapons before the journey to town, Hope watched Sara braid her hair with practiced movements, the pendant catching the last rays of sunlight through the window. He realized with sudden clarity that protecting her had given him purpose beyond mere survival for the first time since losing his family. The 12-mile journey to Silver Creek gave Sara ample opportunity to study the territory. Hope noticed how she mentally mapped escape routes, noted landmarks, calculated distances, the habits of someone accustomed to hostile territory. He recognized the strategy in her observations, having employed similar techniques during his own darkest days. As they approached the cluster of wooden buildings that constituted the settlement, conversations halted. Stares followed their progress, some curious, others openly hostile. "Eyes straight ahead," Hope murmured as he helped Sara down from the wagon. "Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing fear." Inside the general store, Sheriff Miller leaned against the counter, his badge catching light that his eyes did not reflect. His greeting to Hope was cool, his gaze dismissive when it landed on Sara. "Heard you'd taken in a stray," he remarked, the insult deliberate. Hope's response was measured but firm, just doing what any decent man would. While purchasing supplies, Hope casually inquired about a young Comanche woman named Sky Dancer. The storekeeper's wife glanced nervously toward the door before whispering that soldiers from Fort Keogh had mentioned a native laundress by that name. Hope felt Sara straighten beside him at this first lead. As they prepared to leave, the door swung open and McCready entered with 2 companions. The rail camp foreman dominated the room with his imposing presence, tall, broad-shouldered, with a distinctive scar cutting through his red beard. His eyes locked on Sara with dangerous recognition. Well, he drawled. "Looks like bad weeds are hard to kill." The tension thickened as McCready implied Sara had stolen from the camp, a claim Hope firmly refuted. Other customers pressed themselves against the shelves, eager to avoid what was brewing but unwilling to intervene. Outside, Sheriff Miller approached as Hope helped Sara into the wagon. "You're making powerful enemies, Blackwood," he warned. "Not out of concern, but calculation. Railroad brings prosperity. Folks remember who stands in the way of that." At the Comanche trading post outside town, Sara spoke with an elder in their native language. Hope observed their interaction, noting the respect shown to Sara despite her precarious position. The elder confirmed Sky Dancer had headed to Fort Keogh for laundry work but should have returned weeks ago. Unexpectedly, they encountered Ada Merrick, a widow who farmed neighboring land. Unlike most settlers, she greeted Sara with a nod of acknowledgement, discreetly passing Hope a package containing medical supplies. "McCready was asking about your place," she whispered. "Keep your rifle loaded." On the return journey, Hope spotted riders on a distant ridge clearly following their progress. He took an unexpected route home, using his knowledge of the terrain to lose their pursuers. "You've done this before," Sara observed, not a question, but a recognition. Arriving back at the cabin, Hope immediately began preparations for potential attack, checking sightlines, reinforcing shutters, creating defensive positions. Sara worked alongside him without being asked. Their teamwork now instinctive. "I'm sorry for bringing trouble to your door," Hope said as they finished. "It was already my trouble." Sara replied with unexpected fierceness. "Now at least I'm not facing it alone." That evening, Hope taught Sara about defending the property, which approaches offered cover, how to use terrain to advantage. In turn, she shared Comanche tracking techniques that could alert them to intruders. Night fell, with both Hope and Sara watchful. From the porch, they observed distant torches moving along the railroad tracks, work crews, or perhaps something more ominous. "They won't forget," Sara said quietly. "Men like that can't afford to let someone like me survive to tell the truth." Hope's hand found hers in the darkness, a silent promise of protection. "Then we'll make sure your truth is heard so loudly they can't ignore it." The touch lingered. Both of them recognizing that their alliance had evolved into something neither expected, a partnership against forces larger than either could face alone. Dawn brought the sound of a single approaching rider. Hope positioned himself on the porch with his rifle while Sara covered the rear with the Navy Colt. The visitor proved to be Lieutenant Collins, a young Army officer from Fort Keogh whose careful approach suggested he understood the tension of the situation. "I come with news," Collins announced, remaining mounted at a respectful distance. "There's a woman at the fort. Comanche, name of Sky Dancer. She's been asking after her cousin." Hope felt Sara's intake of breath behind him. "She's alive?" she called, stepping forward. Collins nodded. "Working laundry at the fort for the past month. Says she sent word to meet at the trading post, but her cousin never showed." The lieutenant explained his unofficial visit. Word of a Comanche woman found tied to railroad tracks had reached the fort commander, who saw potential complications for upcoming treaty negotiations. "The colonel believes justice in this matter would serve everyone's interests," Collins said diplomatically before departing. Collins delivered one final warning. McCready and his men had been overheard in the fort saloon, drunk and boasting about teaching a lesson to an Indian woman and the rancher harboring her. They were purchasing extra ammunition, a clear sign of violent intentions. After Collins rode away, Hope and Sara accelerated their defensive preparations. Hope moved horses to the back pasture, filled water barrels, and positioned ammunition caches. Sara created a system of tripwires near likely approaches. Their efficiency together showed how quickly they'd become a team. As dusk approached, bringing the likelihood of attack, Hope and Sara shared a quiet moment on the porch. "Helping you has awakened something I thought died with my family," Hope admitted. "A willingness to fight for more than mere survival." Sara's eyes met his. "Despite my fear, I feel more alive than I have since my father's death." Their growing feelings remained largely unspoken, but evident in small gestures, his hand lingering when passing ammunition, her careful adjustment of his collar before taking positions. Night brought the expected confrontation. McCready led 5 men in a coordinated assault on the cabin. Hope and Sara implemented their defensive plan, conserving ammunition, using prepared positions, communicating with minimal signals. "Don't waste shots," Hope advised as they returned fire from different windows. "Make each one count." In a strategic move, McCready's men set fire to Hope's barn, hoping to draw the defenders out. The flames illuminated the night, creating a tactical challenge as shadows and light shifted unpredictably. "Let it burn," Hope said grimly when Sara glanced toward the blaze. "We can rebuild wood. Lives don't come back." Just as ammunition ran low and the attackers prepared a final push, hoofbeats approached from the direction of the fort. Lieutenant Collins arrived with a squad of soldiers and an unexpected addition, Skydancer herself, riding alongside the military men. "MacCready, you're surrounded." For a moment, it seemed MacCready might order his men to fight, despite the military presence. The outcome hung in balance until one of his own men threw down his weapon, unwilling to die for MacCready's vendetta. With MacCready and his men disarmed and under guard, Sara and Skydancer finally embraced. Their rapid Comanche exchange revealed Skydancer had been searching for Sara since learning of her disappearance, convinced the military to help only by promising valuable intelligence about tribal movements, watching Sara with her cousin. Hope confronted his growing feelings. The thought of Sara leaving now that she'd found Skydancer created an unexpected ache. He recognized that, in saving her, he'd also saved himself from the half-life he'd been living since his family's death. As dawn broke over the smoldering remains of the barn, Lieutenant Collins prepared to transport the prisoners to the fort. He informed Hope and Sara that formal charges would be filed, attempted murder and arson among them, and requested their presence at Fort Keogh to provide testimony. 2 weeks after the attack, Hope, Sara, and Skydancer traveled to Fort Keogh for MacCready's trial. The journey provided opportunity for Skydancer to share her story, how she arrived at the fort for laundry work, sent a message to Sara that never arrived, and feared the worst when her cousin didn't appear. Fort Keogh presented a complex environment, military order alongside frontier roughness. Native people worked various jobs but occupied a clearly subordinate position. Hope noted Sara's tension among so many uniforms, a reminder of historical betrayals her people had suffered. The evening before proceedings began, Hope encountered Sheriff Miller in the fort saloon. The lawman leaned in, whiskey on his breath. "MacCready has powerful railroad connections who view this trial as an inconvenience. Smart man would take compensation and forget the whole matter." Hope's refusal was immediate. "This isn't about money. It's about right and wrong." The makeshift courtroom, a converted mess hall, filled with various factions, soldiers, settlers, railroad workers, and a significant number of native observers. Colonel Harrington presided, his interest more political than judicial, concerned primarily with maintaining peace for upcoming treaty negotiations. Sara's testimony formed the emotional center of the proceedings. Standing before hostile faces, she recounted with dignity her false accusation, the men who dragged her to the tracks, and the hours spent bound waiting for death. When identifying MacCready as her primary attacker, she faced him directly. "I will never forget his face," she stated clearly. He laughed as he tightened the ropes. Her composure under aggressive cross-examination earned reluctant respect even from some initially hostile observers. When asked why she didn't cry out to passing travelers, her answer silenced the room. Who would stop for the voice of a Comanche woman? Hope's testimony corroborated Sara's account and directly challenged community complicity. "That train would have killed her," he stated, looking at jurors and spectators alike. "Anyone who says different is either a fool or a liar." The trial's turning point came from an unexpected source. A young railroad worker named Thomas Jensen broke ranks to testify that MacCready had planted the allegedly stolen items in Sara's bag. His hands trembled as he spoke, clearly aware of the personal risk his truth-telling carried. MacCready's defense portrayed him as a man maintaining necessary order in wild territory. His lawyer characterized Sara as the aggressor, Hope as a misguided outsider interfering with progress. MacCready himself took the stand, his confident manner almost convincing as he described the incident as a prank gone wrong. During a recess, McCready cornered Hope alone in a corridor. "You have no idea what you've started," he threatened. "The railroad doesn't forget enemies." Hope met his gaze steadily. "Neither do I." After 3 tense days, the verdict arrived: guilty for McCready and 2 primary accomplices. Lesser charges for others involved. The sentence was 15 years in territorial prison. Surprisingly harsh punishment that signaled changing times. As McCready was led away in chains, his parting threat to Hope and Sara, "This isn't over," carried ominous weight despite his current powerlessness. Outside the fort, their legal victory felt tempered by awareness of its exceptional nature. "Most times, there is no justice for my people," Skydancer observed. Sara took Hope's hand, a gesture now comfortable between them. "Then we make this time count," she replied, her eyes reflecting both determination and the recognition that their battle against injustice must continue beyond this single case. Returning to Hope's ranch, they found the burned barn a stark reminder of violence. Skydancer announced her decision to stay, having received permission to leave her fort position. 3 is stronger than 2, she said simply. They began rebuilding, not just the physical structures, but a new kind of household. Word of the trial verdict spread, bringing unexpected allies. Neighbors who previously kept distance arrived with lumber and willing hands. Lieutenant Collins appeared with off-duty soldiers experienced in carpentry. "Colonel's compliments," he explained. "He believes in rewarding those who support justice." Sara's linguistic abilities led to her being sought as a translator for traders, and occasionally the army itself. This professional recognition gave her economic independence and status beyond Hope's Indian woman, a designation some settlers still used, despite the trial outcome. Skydancer proved herself skilled with animals and gardening, expanding the homestead's self-sufficiency by incorporating traditional Comanche plants alongside conventional crops. Her presence completed something vital for Sara, the family connection she feared permanently lost. Hope found himself changing most profoundly. The protective walls built after losing his family gradually opened to admit these 2 remarkable women. His nightmares decreased. He laughed more readily. When Sara caught him speaking to his wife's photograph, explaining changes to the cabin, he realized he was finding peace with his past rather than being haunted by it. The nature of Hope and Sara's relationship evolved organically through shared work and danger. Their first kiss came unexpectedly during a thunderstorm as they raced to secure livestock, a moment both tender and charged with recognition of what they'd found in each other. Lieutenant Collins's frequent visits revealed growing interest in Skydancer. Their developing relationship paralleled Hope and Sara's, suggesting possibility for broader reconciliation between cultures. Despite McCready's imprisonment, his influence lingered. Railroad associates occasionally created minor troubles, delayed shipments, inflated prices at the general store. Hope and Sara responded by increasing self-sufficiency and strengthening community alliances. The cabin's transformation became physical manifestation of their blended life. Comanche weavings hung beside Hope's family photographs. The garden produced traditional medicinal plants alongside conventional vegetables. Meals incorporated techniques and ingredients from both traditions. When Captain Collins, now promoted, brought news of a planned reservation boundary adjustment, Sara faced a pivotal choice. Tribal leaders requested her help as translator for negotiations, recognizing her unique position straddling both worlds. The opportunity would mean extended time away from the ranch, recognizing Sara's conflict between personal happiness and community responsibility. Hope proposed marriage in his characteristically straightforward way. "I want you to have a place that's always yours to return to, no matter where duty takes you." Their wedding ceremony honored both traditions, a Christian exchange of vows followed by Comanche blessing rituals led by Sky Dancer. The community's varied attendants, from Ada Merrick to Army officers to tribal elders, represented fragile hope for coexistence. As they stood together under the open sky, Sara's pendant caught sunlight, symbolizing continuity amid transformation. Hope reflected that the greatest revelation wasn't that he found love again, but that healing comes through embracing new possibilities rather than clinging to what was lost. Spring brought renewal to the expanded ranch 1 year later. The rebuilt barn stood larger and stronger. New fencing enclosed expanded pasture. The cabin had gained additional rooms. These physical improvements mirrored the emotional and social growth of its inhabitants. Sara had established herself as a respected translator, traveling occasionally to assist with negotiations between tribal leaders and government officials. Her unique position allowed her to advocate for fair treatment while helping both sides understand cultural differences that led to misunderstanding. Sky Dancer and Captain Collins announced their engagement, their relationship having deepened through shared values despite different backgrounds. Collins had requested reassignment to Indian Affairs, hoping to implement more humane policies from within the system. Hope, now fully emerged from grief's shadow, found the ranch thriving under their shared management. His reputation had evolved from solitary widower to respected community member who stood firm for justice regardless of a person's origins. The railroad continued expanding westward, bringing increased settlement and pressure on native lands. This broader context reminded them that individual triumphs occurred against ongoing historical injustices. However, small changes appeared. The new section foreman enforced rules against harassment of native workers. The trading post now extended credit to Comanche customers. Sheriff Miller had lost his recent re-election to a reform candidate. News arrived that McCready had received early release through railroad company influence. Hope and Sara took practical precautions without allowing fear to dominate their lives. "We've faced him before," Hope reminded Sara. "We're stronger now than we were then." The emotional climax came with the birth of Hope and Sara's child, a daughter they named Hannah Sky, honoring both families' histories. The birth, attended by Sky Dancer and Ada Merrick rather than a doctor, demonstrated the women's practical competence and their created family bonds. A naming ceremony brought together diverse community members, some still uncomfortable but present nonetheless. The gathering included traditional Comanche elements alongside settler customs, creating new shared traditions. Sara taught their daughter both English and Comanche, determined she would walk confidently in both worlds. Hope built a cradle incorporating woodworking techniques he learned from his father, and design Sky Dancer contributed. The story concluded where it began, near the railroad tracks where Hope first found Sara. They stood together at the cedar posts they had placed to mark the spot, now weathered but still standing. Their daughter slept against Hope's chest as Sara touched the marker thoughtfully. "Some would say we should forget what happened here," she observed. "Move forward only." Hope considered this. Moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying the truth with us as we build something better. A train whistle sounded in the distance, once a harbinger of death, now simply part of the landscape they navigated. Sara's hand found Hope's, their fingers intertwining as they turned back toward home. "The tracks remain," Sara said, but they no longer decide where we can go. Hope reflected that the Comanche girl tied to the tracks wasn't just saved by his bullet. They saved each other. And in doing so, created possibility for healing beyond themselves. Their life together didn't erase historical injustices or guarantee safety in an often hostile world, but it demonstrated that individual choices to stand for humanity and justice matter, even against overwhelming forces. Some wounds run deeper than rope burns on skin. They cut through generations, carved by those who claimed progress while laying tracks across lives deemed expendable. Yet even in the darkest moments of our shared history, individual acts of courage illuminate paths forward. This story reminds us that justice rarely arrives through grand gestures or sweeping policies. It comes through one person recognizing another's humanity when the world has turned away. It emerges from the courage to stand against the crowd, to rebuild what flames have taken, to believe healing possible even after unspeakable harm. The rails of progress need not run over the vulnerable. The march of civilization need not trample those with different traditions. There is strength in the spaces between cultures, not in erasing differences, but in honoring them, weaving them together into something stronger than either could be alone. Perhaps this is our shared lesson. Salvation comes not in changing others, but in changing ourselves, in recognizing that our own healing often begins when we reach out to heal others, in understanding that love grows most powerfully in the broken places, in the scars that remind us both of our vulnerability and our resilience. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story touched you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe for more tales that explore our shared humanity. And remember, your voice matters in this ongoing conversation.